Hi folks, Tony from Tacoma, Washington. Hey, today I want to talk to you about my California Air Tool 2510 STP air compressor. I've had this little guy for a couple of years. It's really doing an outstanding job for me, and I just thought it was time to share the good news. So I'm a do-it-yourself homeowner kind of guy, and I was looking for an air compressor. I was doing some reloading and going through several cans of pressurized air, so I needed a small air compressor. It was my very first one, so I went to Harbor Freight, picked up one of their pancake style compressors, just to do the job. It was really cheap and inexpensive. I thought it would do the job for me. Got it home, unboxed it, plugged it in, turned it on. Man, that thing was so noisy that it actually shook the walls in my house. I just couldn't stand to use it. So I brought that back, and I started looking for a quieter alternative. Well, back then, not that many people were doing quiet compressors. California Air Tool was one of the only companies I saw at a reasonable price that had quiet compressors. There was none local. I had to buy it online and kind of do it sight unseen. And this particular model, this 2510 STP, was like $250. And, I could go to Home Depot or Lowe's and I could get a DeWalt or a Makita for right at that same price point and actually get a more powerful machine. So I really didn't want to spend $250 on this particular air compressor. So what I learned was that California Air Tools has an online factory store where they sell stuff, reconditioned items, and they had this particular 2510 in their factory store, and they only wanted like $160 for it, and it came with an air kit. They gave you some nozzles and a hose and stuff. So for $160, there was nothing at Home Depot or Lowe's that even came close to the quality of this air compressor. So I went ahead and bought it, and I got to tell you, it's been fantastic. It does everything I needed to do, and it's super quiet and dependable. The thing only puts out 60 decibels, so you can talk over the sound of it running. It's got a 1 horsepower motor, but it's super energy efficient. You plug it into 110, it doesn't draw much power. I think it's rated at 8 amps, I'm not sure, but a hairdryer requires a lot more energy than this air compressor. So the beauty of that is when you take it with you and plug it into some circuit, you don't have to worry about blowing the circuit breaker. And here's that little 2510 running. It's really quiet. It puts out 59 to 60 decibels. It's easy to talk right over the top of it. It's more like a humming sound. Now, in contrast, the Harbor Freight pancake air compressor that I bought, not only was it very loud, but it made a really obnoxious slapping sound. I just couldn't stand to be around it. But this one, it's in my garage. You can have a conversation over the top of it. When it comes on, it's almost kind of a pleasing sound. It's more of a hum. It really, the sound is very quiet, and it's not disruptive at all. So this little guy works perfect for small jobs. Like I said, I needed some air to replace, cans of air that I use for reloading. This thing does that perfectly. So no more cans of air. I'm able to blow down my press and stuff, and have, it does that perfectly. It blows down my press, and if I'm doing some gun cleaning and want to blow some solvent out of the action, it does that fantastic. Now it's only got a 2.5 gallon tank, so the tank runs down pretty quickly when you're using an air gun, a blow gun. But for small jobs, it does perfect. One of the things I did with this was I was doing some trim in my upstairs house. And using a brad nailer, and man, this thing was so quiet and perfect for that application to run that brad nailer as I hung that molding. But it's kind of limited. It's a 1 horsepower motor. Now the thing I like about this unit is it's a 1 horsepower motor, but it has a peak of 2 horsepower. So if you put it under demand, it fluctuate all the way up to 2 horsepower. Well, that's pretty powerful for this small of an air compressor. So that's what the numbers mean. 2510 means 2.5 gallons of stored air and a 1 horsepower motor. And I'm not sure what the STP stands for. Anyway, like I said, I'm kind of a DIY guy. I do my own auto maintenance. And I was wondering, hey, could I get an air compressor or get this air compressor to run some of my air tools? At that time, I didn't have an air impact gun. But man, an impact gun to rotate my tires and pull the lug nuts off my Chevy Silverado 2500 would have really been great. So I started wondering, well, would this little guy supply enough air to run an impact gun? And what I decided was that little 2.5 gallon storage tank didn't really have enough air capacity to run that air impact gun very well. So what I did was I went to Harbor Freight and I picked up, one of these 11 gallon portable storage tanks, and I started using that. Now, what you see right here has been modified. So initially I had it plumbed differently, but over the course of time I learned that I had created some restrictions in the line and I had to replumb it. So let's talk about that. Okay, so let's back up just a little bit. So I don't have much space in my garage. I don't have space for a larger compressor. So this little guy just sits on the shelf underneath, on my storage shelf. So that works out really good for me. And with the compressor on one side and the storage tank on the other, I have just enough room to fit it all in. So combined together, I have an 11 gallon storage tank from Harbor Freight and the 2.5 gallons that come on the compressor. It gives me a total of 13.5 gallons of air storage. So what I've done is pretty simple. I just run a line out of the exit of the compressor. I actually added a valve just so I could turn off the air supply if I want to. That's on and that's off. And then I just run that line out of the compressor right on over and into the Harbor Freight portable storage tank. So here it's coming in here. Really simple setup. The 11 gallon tank comes with a 1/2 inch fitting here. And so what I've done is just used 1/4 inch. Now what I was told was that 1/4 inch had enough airflow to run most air tools. I think, and I'm doing this from memory, but I think I heard that a 1/4 inch air line could deliver about 90 CFM. Well, my air impact, I think, requires somewhere in the vicinity of 6 on full load. So I was thinking if it would deliver 90, and I only need 6, 1/4 inch should be, more than adequate. I know some larger impacts require a higher demand, would need a 1/2 inch air line, but I was thinking 1/4 for my application should be just fine. Well, what I found was, with my original setup, that when I would use the air impact, I wasn't getting enough power out of it. I've got an Aircat Stubby that's supposed to put out about 500 foot-pounds of torque, and I was having it struggle with bolts at 200 foot-pounds. It would zip my lug nuts right off at 150 foot-pounds of torque. But a few weeks ago I was doing replacing the hubs in my truck, and the air impact was really struggling on some of the suspension components. So I was thinking, well, what's going on? If I've got a 500 foot-pound air impact and I'm only pulling off 200 pounds, how come I'm not getting enough power? Well, here's what I found. My original plumbing, I used to have the supply line to the gun come off here. And so what that meant was I was getting air in lines from the compressor here, which would go up and flow and refill the tank. But I had all these sharp bends and restriction points going to feed my impact. So what I've done to eliminate that was I came straight off the tank and then went straight out into the supply line. That's helped quite a bit. So now when I key up the impact, I don't get nearly as much of a pressure drop. Before, it was dropping from 90 pounds of static all the way down to 60 pounds of working pressure. Now that I've changed it to this, I'm getting from 90 to about 75. So things to be concerned about when you're plumbing your own is these smaller valves. I don't remember if I got these from Harbor Freight or from Home Depot or Lowe's. They're called 1/4 inch, but they're really not 1/4 inch. They're 1/4 inch fittings, but the ball valve inside of this valve is really small. It's like a 1/8 inch ball valve. So what that means is all the airflow coming out of the tank is passing through a 1/8 inch ball valve, which is highly restrictive. Then in addition, these T's really compress down the airflow as well. Again, they're 1/4 inch fittings, but inside of the tubing itself, it's very restrictive. Let me take you over to the bench. Let's look at some fittings. Here's the 1/2 inch fitting that comes out of the air tank, and I've got this one going into a 1/4 inch adapter. So you can see the size of that 1/4 inch. It's actually, it actually allows quite a bit of airflow. Here's another 1/4 inch, and you can see just how much airflow that thing will let through. It's actually very adequate. But now here is one of those T's, and you can see how restrictive that T is. Now, especially in here, look at how restrictive it is, on the inside. So it really, even though you start off with a 1/4 inch and they're 1/4 inch threads, inside is not completely a 1/4 inch. Now that's really true with the valves. I was able to replace my valve with a valve called a full port valve, and that means that whatever diameter of your threads, if it's a 1/4 inch valve, the ball valve itself is actually a 1/4 inch, so that it maintains a 1/4 inch of airflow through the entire system. The valves that I got from, I don't remember where, Home Depot or Harbor Freight, they're 1/4 inch threads, but the ball valve itself was extremely restrictive, down to like 1/8 of an inch. So if you're plumbing your own system, really be cognizant of that. Now here's a problem I really had. This is here's an elbow that I put in my original system. And what happened was, so I came out of the top of the tank with this, and then I put this right on top to come out. So it immediately made a 90-degree bend. Well, what I didn't realize was when you put threads in this, the threads actually come all the way through and block this orifice. So what I'm saying is, if you take this and screw it in, it'll actually on the inside interfere with the flow of this orifice. So what I had done is I had screwed this in so far that it was blocking about 90% of the airflow coming out of the tank. So again, the only reason I'm telling you all of this is when you plumb your tank, if you plumb a tank, maintain a standard 1/4 inch all the way through. Some people recommend you don't even use 1/4 inch, that you go 3/8 of an inch. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about are the actual plugs that go into your air tools. This is a high flow 1/4 inch air connector, air fitting, and here's the stock ones that you get from Home Depot or Harbor Freight, and you can see the difference in the air, in the size of the fitting. They're both 1/4 inch. Like I say, the black one is a high flow, and the chrome one is the brass one is just a normal 1/4 inch. So I've changed my supply line to these high flow fittings, and again, it's not a perfect system, but for the price that I've got involved and using my impact, it's working just fine. Okay, let's take one more look at this storage tank and how it's plumbed. the Harbor Freight storage tank comes out with a 1/2 inch fitting. I've got a 1/2 to 3/8 inch bushing, and I'm coming up into a 3/8 inch T. Then I reduce it down to 1/4 inch to go into this 1/4 inch ball valve. This is a full port ball valve, so it delivers a 1/4 inch on the inside all the way through. It's not like the cheap ones that I got from Harbor Freight that reduce it all the way down to like 1/8 inch. These full port valves, again, maintain a 1/4 inch all the way through. Then the reason I reduced it to a 1/4 inch and not 3/8 is this regulator from Harbor Freight has 1/4 inch fittings. So it wouldn't have made any sense to have a 3/8 inch valve and pay that extra amount for the 3/8 just to reduce it to go into the 1/4 inch. Now this is a good 1/4 inch. It maintains a good 1/4 inch of volume all the way through this valve. And then, just because I had it on hand, I went ahead and used a 3/8 inch coupler here at the end. It's 3/8, but it screws in with a 1/4 inch. So the idea is that I've got a little additional airflow. Then I'm coming into a 3/8 inch line, and then I'm using those high flow fittings, and then from the high flow fitting into a high flow into my gun, and that's the system. So again, this little gun is rated at about 500 foot-pounds. I think you really have to have a heavy duty line to get 500 out of it, but I'm getting a solid 250 out of it now. So for everything I do, 250 foot-pounds is more than enough. This is a little Aircat. I think it was called a 1055. I've got it covered up with the padding, but it's working good for a homeowner. So anyway, here's an example of the pressure drop when I key this thing up. So we're starting off at about 110, and that's full power. So it drops to just below 60, just below 70 pounds. And again, that'll deliver me about 250 foot-pounds of power through the gun. Now I can improve that. I can turn up the regulator to about 120. The power drop will be down to about 80. The gun requires 90 pounds of working pressure, and by increasing the regulator, I can get it to about 80 pounds of working pressure. That's as much as this little system is going to do. So you're not going to get full power out of your impact. But the idea is, by using trying to get the most I can out of the 2510 and have the greatest versatility as a homeowner and spend the least amount of money. So how much do I have into this? Well, I got about 160 bucks into my air compressor. And then I have the Harbor Freight 11-gallon storage tank is 40 bucks, $39.99. I spent way too much on plumbing. I keep buying fittings and this and that. I probably have another $50 into fittings. So what do I have? I have a small air compressor that works great indoors. It runs a brad nailer. It's light. It's easy. It's 44 pounds. It's easy to take with you. And then at home, when you need to do mechanical stuff, you can run your impact with it. Does it run your impact at full power? No, but it does a pretty darn good job. 250 pounds out of that little stubby is pretty adequate for a homeowner. So for about $250, I have a pretty versatile air system that seems to, match my lifestyle. It's not too big, it's not cumbersome, it gives me good versatility. It wasn't super expensive, it's dependable, it's quiet. It just does what I need it to do. So if you're looking for a similar setup, I know California Air Tools has, doesn't have this model. I think this model was discontinued, but I know they have others. I highly recommend you go through their factory online store where you can buy their blemished items for a substantial reduction in price. Anyway, Tony from Tacoma, Washington, take care.